Okay, so we're going to be talking about Ember today. This right here is just if you want to download our app. I'm from Scan. We were on Shark Tank recently. We didn't get a deal. Cuban didn't like us, but we're still doing very well, and we're very excited. We're here based in Provo. I've got stickers of our app icon if anyone wants it. I'll pass those around. But we're going to be going over Ember. Lots of big companies use Ember to kind of create some complex web applications. Square, if you've ever logged into the Square dashboard, that's all Ember. Discourse uses Ember. Zendesk uses Ember. The Ghost blog uses Ember, is switching to Ember for their admin dashboard. Travis, if you've ever used Travis integration, that's using Ember. So lots of big companies are using Ember. Scan's obviously using Ember. I've fallen in love with it, and I enjoy doing it a lot, so I want to introduce it to as many people that want to hear about it. A lot of people are using Angular. I think Angular is great. We're not here to talk about pros and cons between the two. I think if you're using Angular or Ember, you're well off. Good for you for using something awesome. Ember advertises itself as a framework, though. As a framework, it has some opinions about how things should work. It's having you use routes, controllers, models, views, and it has naming conventions to kind of make all the apps feel similar. So it is a little bit more opinionated than some of the other JavaScript libraries out there. We're going to put together a simple Ember application today to kind of go over some of the basic features of Ember. We're going to be using Ember, Ember Data, and Ember CLI. Now, Ember Data is currently in beta. Ember CLI is still being worked on. But Ember is released and in production, and Ember Data is getting really close there. Ember CLI, I think, works great, but again, it's still in development, so you want to take that into consideration. I've put all this code up on my GitHub. There's the URL there. I've tried to make it nice and easy for the people that get bored and want to jump ahead, or if you want to review something, I have a whole bunch of links there to skip to the steps that you want to review more, or if you want to go ahead, or whatever. So take a look at that. It's pretty well documented, in my opinion, and it'll get you going. Okay? That's the whole slideshow. So we're gonna use Ember CLI to create our project. If you don't have Ember CLI installed, you're first obviously going to need to install it. To install Ember CLI, you're going to need Node, and then you're going to use Node to install it. You're just going to do an npm install -g to install it to the global, and then do Ember -CLI. That's on the README of the GitHub repo if you want to take a look at that. You also need to install Bower to manage those front-end dependencies. And again, that's just going to be an npm install -g Bower, also on the README. Once you have those both installed, you're ready to get going. To create a new project using Ember CLI, you're just going to type in Ember new, and then the name of the project that you want to do. I'm going to do game library. It creates a structure and installs a whole bunch of packages through npm, and then installs some more front-end packages with Bower. And this is fascinating to watch. As it's installing, it's going to create a kind of a skeleton structure for your application. We're going to be doing most of our work inside of the app directory that it creates. That app directory is going to have folders for your controllers, folders for your routes, folders for your views, folders for your models, just a whole bunch of folders. And it's also going to be using ES6 modules. Ember CLI is set up to use ES6 modules. So you're going to export those, and then we use an ES6 transpiler to make it so we can use those in the browsers that don't support ES6 modules, which isn't really that many. So there's our directory. We have app config. These are really the two ones you need to work with. App is going to be all your files. Config is to set up your environments. But basically, you already have a short little Ember app running. And if you hit that on your local host, you can see there's your beautiful Ember app. Wonderful. Not very useful. Let me add this to my project real quick. Add folder to project. Okay, so here's our app folder. There's all of our components, controllers, helpers, little folders. That's where we're going to be doing the majority of our work. So we have a basic index page where we could link in different assets. And then we have a public folder where you can put in assets that don't need to be built. All our other assets, our JS files, our CSS files, are going to be running through Broccoli to compile and build and concat together whatnot. So let's just get a simple layout put together. I'm going to bring in Bootstrap 3, show you where to put that, and then link it to the library. So I've already downloaded Bootstrap 3, so you don't have to watch me do that. I'm just using the CSS version. I just want this min CSS file. I'm going to put that inside of the, it's not that one. So inside of our app directory, there's a styles directory. We can just move the CSS right into there. And then we also need the fonts. The fonts don't need to go through any kind of build step. We just want to use them as is. So we can put that fonts folder right inside of that public directory. And now we're ready to kind of set up our application. I want to make sure I bring in, I want to bring in that Bootstrap file. So I'm just going to reference there. Ember CLI puts in just some basic tag styles. I don't need that, so I'll get rid of that. But now we can actually start building our application template. So Ember uses handlebars to kind of create those templates. So we have an application HBS, and right now you can see this is our welcome to Ember. That's where our title came from earlier. The application template's kind of like your layout frame. Everything is going to render inside of the application template. So here you'd put your generic layout, and then where you want your content to change, you put that outlet tag kind of thing. Okay, so we're just going to put a real basic Bootstrap theme in here just to make it look nice. I can't type today. Navbar header. And then navbar brand. This is just Bootstrap 3. This has nothing to do with Ember, so don't worry, like, what in the world is this? And we'll call this game library. Okay, so we've put that up there. We look back at our app, and there's our application. There's our outlet. I'm going to put this inside of a container. And then just by default, Ember's also going to give you an index template. So I'm going to create that index template and kind of show you how that wraps, how that gets rendered inside of the outlet. So index.hbs. And I can say, I don't care, game library, welcome. Man. Okay, so you can't really see, but there's the application template with game library. There is the index template. In my Chrome developer tools, I have the Ember extension installed. And if you want to, that kind of lets you see where your application template's being rendered, what it's being put together with, and where your index template's being rendered. So you can see how those are kind of nested together. Okay? So nothing too complex there. We just have a handlebars file for our templates. So we actually want our these to kind of not be so static. We actually want to be pulling in data to make this more interactive. So we're creating a simple game library where you can add games to an application, browse those games, get details about those games, rate the games, delete the games, whatever. So what our first step that we want to do is create a list of games that we can browse and look at. So we want to use Ember to pull down a list of games from our server, create links to them, be able to click on those links to view details about those games. Inside of our application folder, we have a router.js. Ember puts a lot of emphasis on the URLs. They want the URLs in your JavaScript application to work. They don't want to break the back button. You navigate. You can go in and type into the browser bar the URL, and you'll go to that, and it will load up correctly. If you hit the back button, your JavaScript application is not going to go back to a completely different page. It's actually going to step back through the router. And so Ember puts a huge emphasis on that and has a wonderful router built right in. We want to create a games resource inside of that router, and this will give us a URL that we can go to. So I'm going to just find a resource, call it games. And then if we just made a template for that right away, just call it games.hps, the same name as the template, or the same name as the route. We can have a simple games page here. There's no link to it now, but if we came up here to the URL and typed in games, you can see we're on the games template. Obviously, we would rather have a link to it. So on our welcome page, our index page, let's go ahead and put a link to our templates. To create links in Ember, you're going to use a link to. We'll say browse games. That's the title of the link, or the text of the link. And then you specify the route that you want to link to. I want to link to the games route that I defined in my router. And we'll talk about that later. Oh, so sad. It's back? Okay. And there's our link. Clicking on that creates an anchor tag for us and links us to that router. If you want it to, you can also put additional classes on it just by typing those attributes. And then that's all styled up. Okay? So just kind of a normal anchor tag there. That's what you can think of it as. Just a link to the route you're linking to. Now our games, we want to display a list of games here that we can click on. So I'm going to hard code this list of games in first and then show you how you can get rid of that hard coded list. So when you click on a link in Ember, or when you go to a route in Ember, the first thing that it's going to do is hit a routes object. And the routes object's responsible for giving you a model to work with. By default, if Ember can't find, like if we click on games and it can't find the games route, it's going to create that route for you automatically and kind of just give it some defaults. Right now, it's not too helpful because it's not giving us a model. We want to define that model. So instead of using the default route that Ember gives us, we want to create the route. Again, it's just going to be named after the route. So this is games.js. And since we're using ES6 modules, we're just going to go ahead and export this route. So we want to do, we're creating an ember.route. We're extending that class to define our own methods to it. We're going to define a model method. And in this model method, we return usually a JavaScript object or an array of what we want our model to be. In this case, we want a list of games, so we're going to return an array. And I'm just going to real quick hard code this with a few objects. Good enough. Okay? So we have two objects using as our route, just a simple array. In our template, we can render, we can loop through those. Sorry, messed that up. We can loop through those and output a list item or whatever. So we're just using the handlebars helper each, looping over the game and outputting the name, and also closing our list item tag. Okay? So we've pulled those models down from the route, looped through them, and outputted them. Because we returned an array, Ember's automatically created an array controller for us. We didn't define what type of controller that we're using because we didn't need to customize it. So Ember's looked at it, said, hey, they have an array. Let's use an array controller, and that lets us loop through the items inside of the model easily. If we had returned an object, Ember would have created an object controller for us automatically. We'll talk more about controllers in just a bit, but so saying this, that's referring to the controller. And so I'm saying each game in that controller, looping through it, outputting the name property of those objects. Questions so far?
I got a quick silly question. When you created that link,
Mm-hmm.
and you added the button classes,
Mm-hmm.
does that render semantically, or
So if you want to go back,
you end up with a link that just has the
so if we inspect that, you can maybe you can see.
Okay.
You can see it's just an anchor tag. It's given it a class, button primary. It's added Ember view to it. It's given it an ID class, but it is an anchor tag. You can see right now there's also a whole bunch of these script metamorph tags. That's right now how Ember's keeping track of where these handlebar things are so it can update it. Pretty soon Ember's going to release something called HTML bars, which is a replacement for handlebars, and it's going to get rid of all these ugly script tags that mess up your CSS. But right now we're still using handlebars. HTML bars isn't out yet, but it will be a wonderful improvement to Ember. Other questions? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, so it's not semantic. It's just a link with the button class.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we want to be able to click on these individual games to actually view details about that game. So let's go ahead and go back to our router. We have a games resource. Ember lets you create nested routes. So inside of this games resource, I'm going to define a function to specify the nested routes. So here I want to have a details route. And this will create a URL of, currently it's going to say URL is games/details. But I need to know what game I'm looking at. I can't just always go to games.details because I might have 7 games and that same URL is not going to work for 7 different games. So you can optionally specify a path that you want to use for that route. And I'm going to specify it with a :ID, which gives me a dynamic parameter inside of my route. So now my route's going to be games/ and an ID that I specify. Now I can link to that. However, I have these hard-coded models in here. Well, let's go ahead and give them an ID since we need that ID. And I can come in here to my template. Let me close up some of these. I got too many templates. Change this into a link to. I'm still going to use the game.name as the name of the anchor. I'm going to link to games.details. And then I'm going to pass in the game as the model for that link. And so Ember's going to take that model, look at it, and use that to fill out the URL. So it's going to say game. I need the ID to create the URL of details1 or details2. Save that. These are links. If you look right at the bottom, that's games2. That's games1. Clicking on them right now doesn't do much, but you can say the URL changes to games1. If I created a games details template, so games is a folder, because this is a nested route. And inside of that folder, I'm going to do details.hbs. And then maybe I can do reference the name of the game here. So now you would expect that when you click on these links, you would see that game name. But we're not really seeing anything, even though the routes are changing. So what's happened here is we have a nested route. And just like in our application, we had to specify where that content went. When you have a nested route, you need to specify another outlet for that nested content to appear. So if you just put another outlet tag in there and save it, you can see now it's rendering in that outlet. Okay, so we have our, again, if you look at our Ember, you can see we have our application template, our games template, and then our games detail template nested inside of there. Okay, just to make this a little bit easier, I'm just going to put in some classes in here real quick from Bootstrap. This is just all Bootstrap. Don't worry about this. That'll just give us a 2-column layout. Did I save it? Need another closing div like that? Someone sees something wrong. Anyway, it's not important, but that was just going to give us a nested layout. Did I spell class wrong in any of those? Yeah, maybe my screen's not wide enough. Maybe it's just, there it is. Yeah, the screen's just not wide enough. Thank you. That's Ember Bootstrap for you. Okay. You'll notice another thing, though. When I'm hitting games 2, I'm not rendering that game name right away. It's not getting rendered until I actually click on one of those links. So what's happening is when we click on these links, we're passing in the model into there. But when we refresh the page, we're just hitting the URL directly. We're not going through any of these links. And so this URL does not have that model. Okay? So if we wanted to, we would have to go inside and create a model for that details controller. So I've created a games folder. Inside of that games folder, I've put details. So export default, Ember, route, extend, defining a model function. And again, right now I'm just hard coding things in, so we would have to pick what game we wanted to hard code to, which is a problem. We'll fix that in just a bit. But you can see now when I come in through the URL, it's getting that model. Okay? So the model you can pass through on the links, and it's not going to run that model function in the route. But if you come through the URL, it needs to load it through that route, and it's calling the model function here and pulling up that model. Okay? Obviously, though, hard coding these models in is not going to work for us. So let's go ahead and use Ember data to define those models and be able to pull them from an API or something. So inside of our models folder, we're going to create a game model, so game.js. And we're using Ember data. So Ember data has DS as its namespace. They have a model object that we want to extend. And then I'm going to export that before I forget. Then we can define what this model looks like. So we have a name attribute. That's a string. We don't need to define the ID. It just assumes we have an ID. And really, that's all we have right now. Okay? So that'll create that game model. And then in our routes, instead of hard coding them in, we can reference the data store. So to pull data from Ember data, you go this.store. We want to find game. So that will find all of them. If you want to find a specific one, you specify an ID. So we want to find all of them. And now if we refresh this and look at our console, you can see it's doing an API call to games. If I stretch that out. Oh. Okay. To game. Sorry, it's doing an API call to game. Now, if we had a REST API endpoint at that, it could return some JSON data, and we could load it up. Obviously, I haven't defined that REST endpoint or whatever. So I'm going to define a fixture adapter The fixture data just says take the, instead of hitting an API endpoint URL, just load up some data from a text file and use the data in the text file instead. So I'm going to use a fixture adapter to pull data from text files instead of having to create a backend. This is useful when you're building your app and you want to focus on the front end, don't want to bug your backend developers to create APIs for you. You want to do a proof of concept or a demo presentation. So I'm going to create a new file, new folder, called it adapters. I'm going to define an application adapter. I'm going to export the built-in fixture adapter. Oops, extend.
What's the DS for?
That's Ember Data's namespace. So Ember, DS just is Ember Data. So that's coming from Ember Data, not from Ember. So if you don't have Ember Data included, you can't use DS. Then inside of my game models, I'm going to reopen this class that lets me modify it and add some new kind of like static properties. Define a fixtures array. Yes, thank you. And here we can define our, so ID1, name, roads and boats. We'll do it as a different game so we can see it's coming through. ID2, name, Arabian Nights. Okay? So these are just fixtures. This is going to simulate coming back from the API. So you can see now we're loading in roads and boats and we're loading in Arabian Nights. That's now coming from that fixture. If we look at the Ember inspector, you can see we have our game records. Well, you can see we have our game records here. Here's our objects inside of it. Fascinating. Okay? So that's now coming from Ember Data. That's all coming in right. When I refresh, I'm still getting my hard-coded one. So I want to come back into my details and replace this. So here we're going to do this.store.find. We said we could specify an ID here to pull that from the store. Obviously, that ID is dynamic. Going back to our router, it's inside of a ID dynamic parameter. So inside of the routes, if you have dynamic parameters, it's going to give you a params argument. And then we can just pull the ID from that params, because we called it :ID in the router, so it's going to be ID in the parameters. So now, if we refresh it with 2, we get Arabian Nights. If we refresh it with 1, oh, not 10. If we refresh it with 1, we get our roads and boats. Okay? So now that's correctly coming from Ember Data. Questions? Okay. Let's give our models a little bit more detail. Let's have min players, and that's going to be a number. You can do number, string, Boolean, date. So we're going to have min and max players. Let's define these. Min players, we'll say for roads and boats, is 1. Max players is 6. Min players is 2. We'll say max players is 4. Well, let's just do 2 so I don't have to. I'm just going to come up with different cases. Let me add one more game for another case. We're going to say werewolf. That's spelled wrong, but it doesn't really matter. And we're going to give that null max players. Okay. Let's say we want to display that on our template. So we want to say, hey, the min players are this, and the max players are this. Just pulling those properties from the model. You can see roads and boats is saying 1 through 6. Arabian Nights is saying 2 through 2. And werewolf is saying 2 through nothing. That data is definitely coming out. It could be presented better. So Ember lets you define computed properties. Computed properties are properties that don't really exist on the model. They're made up of other properties inside of the model. So I'm going to create a num_players computed property. And to define a function as a property, you just do a dot property on the end of it. And real simple, let's just do the same thing that we have right now. When you're working with Ember objects, you pull out their properties by using a get, and you set their properties by using a set. That's so the observers can correctly update. If you worked with Angular, you can see that's a little bit different than what Angular does. So we're going to pull out min players, and we'll concatenate on the n dash, and then we'll get the max players. Okay, let's go back to our details. Let's replace this with our num_players computed property. And you can see it's kind of working. We've got 2-null, whatever. You can see Ember, by default, is escaping all of the properties being outputted so that you can't do injections or whatnot. If you want to declare something as a safe string and you're like, I trust this content, go ahead and output it raw, you can do a triple mustache. And then that, did I save it? Did I miss a semicolon? Thank you. Then it'll output it, and it'll trust that as safe. So obviously, you want to be careful with that, because that does give you a place to inject stuff. But if you trust it, you can use that triple mustache to output and render it. OK, so now we have exactly what we had before. Let's go ahead and give that some more logic. So we can say something like, if, let me just define some variables up here so I don't have to keep typing. OK, so if the min is the same as the max, then let's just return the min. If max is the same as null, well, let's do that. Let's do an Ember is empty. This will check to see if it's empty, an empty string, a null, an undefined, whatever. So if max is undefined, null, or blank, whatever, let's just return min with a plus symbol. OK? So now that computed property has some logic inside of it. It's 1 through 6, just plain 2 or 2 plus. OK? One thing.
Question. Instead of doing the this get min players and this get max players, can't you pass those into the property as variables?
Don't spoil anything.
Oh,
one thing that you'll notice is when you're doing computed properties, you need to declare your dependencies. And if you don't declare your dependencies, you're going to run into problems. Let me show what I mean by that. This computed property is depending on min players and max players. If we provide some input to be able to modify those properties, oh, I didn't want to paste it there. Let me just output those raw as well. OK, so here I've created, I've used handlebar templates for the input handler, and I've bound those values of those inputs to my properties, and then I'm just outputting them on the screen. Let's do it. So here's my range of players, 2 to 2, and then I'm displaying them as 2 to 2. If I change this to 4 to 10, you can see min and max are changing, but my computed property is not. It's because I didn't declare that that computer property is dependent on those properties. So inside of your dot property, you need to declare those. So now when we change that, you can see our num players is changing as well. Okay? So when you're defining computed properties, make sure to declare your dependencies. Is that better? OK. How much are we doing on time? Man, we've got too much to cover. Let's go ahead and create a new game. So I want to be able to add a new game to my library. Let's go to our games template. And let's just go ahead and add a button. Link to add new game. This will go to a route called games.new. Let's create that route. So inside of our games resource, we want to create another route. And then we need to create that template. So inside of our games folder, let's just create a simple form. We want to make inputs. Again, you can just use the input handlebar helper or Ember helper. We have a type. This is going to be the name, so we're going to bind it to the name property of our model. And then we're going to bind it to our min players and bind this one to our max players. And let's create a submit button. So input type submit, value add game. And just give that a class real quick so it's easy. Okay, that's our template. We're just binding to some properties of our model. Since we're working with a model, we need to define what model to use. So I'm going to create a new route as well. And we're going to define the model. We're going to use create record to pull down a new blank game model. That will give us a real simple, ugly form. Obviously, you would make this prettier. You have to return that model. That's helpful. You can see as I type in the name, it's automatically adding it to my menu right away, just because of the binding there. We can fix that if we have time. You probably don't want to have it there until you save it. Pushing that add game button currently isn't doing anything. We need to intercept that event and then take the model and put it into our store. So there's two ways that we can do this. One, we can put an action observer on that submit button, or we can use our view to capture the submit event and then translate it to an Ember action. I like to capture the submit event so they can still use the enter key somewhere on the form to enter it instead of always having to click on the submit button. So when you need to capture native JavaScript events and translate them into an Ember action, you can create a view object. A view object is usually just the template. Usually your template's sufficient. But if you need to wrap around custom logic inside of your template, you can create a view. So I'm going to create a games folder inside of views. And then I'm going to create a new view. So export default ember.view.extend. I want to do something with the submit event. So I'm just going to name my method after the event that I'm capturing. I want to prevent the submit. So I'm going to prevent the default of alt. That's just normal JavaScript there. And then what I want to do is get the controller that belongs to the view, and I want to send it an action. So I'm going to send it the add game event. And so I'm going to basically stop the form submitting, translate it, and send up an add game event. And then in my router, I can define the list of actions that the router is listening for. I called it add game. You just name the function the same. And now whenever I submit the form, it's going to trigger that action inside of the Ember route. Okay? Obviously, we don't want to just alert. We want to get that model. So controller, get the model from the controller. And then we're going to save it. Now, if we weren't using the fixture adapter, that would do a post to your API. But since we're using the fixture adapter, it's just going to update our text files. And then that returns a promise, so it can talk to the API and do that all asynchronously. After we've had a successful save, I want to transition to that game. So self transition to, we want to go to games details with our game model to display that information. So we can add a new game, define some in players, add that game. You can see we're now at games fixture 0. That's just because it's dynamically generating that ID. It's added to our list, and it's in our store. Okay? Likewise, if we want, yeah, we got a little bit of time. If we want to delete a game, let's create a route for that. So I'm going to create a delete route. I need to know what game I'm deleting, so I'm going to define a path with a dynamic parameter again. Now for this delete, I don't really need to have a template for it. I just want to delete the game and then go back to my list of games. So inside of my routes, let's create a delete route. We're going to still pull up the model because we need to know what game we're deleting. But after we got the model, we want to do something with it. So Ember provides a before and after model. So after model obviously runs after you've returned the model. Before model happens before you even have a model. In this case, after we got the model, we want to destroy the record. There's delete record and destroy record. Delete record will soft delete it until you save it, and then it'll push it up to the server. Destroy record will delete the record in the store and also post it. Well, also send a delete up to your API. Okay, so we want to delete the record. Again, that returns a promise. After we've deleted it, then we can transition. We'll just go back to the index page. Okay. Obviously, we need a button to delete a game. So inside of our template, let's just link to that. Okay, so we're going to pass our model to it. Okay, so let's go back to our list of games. Let's see, what did I do wrong? Sorry, H, what did you say? Oh, thank you. I didn't do anything wrong. Okay, so here's our delete game button. We push that, it directs to the route, and then it deletes it and comes back to the index page. Okay? And again, if you weren't using the fixture adapter, that's going to send a delete up to your API. So we went back to a games.index route, and you can see in our router, we don't have an index route defined here. Ember gives you a few routes by default. It's going to give you an index route by default in your nested routes. So it creates that for us automatically. It's also going to give you a loading route. If you have asynchronous calls, it's going to show that loading route when your promises are resolving. And then it has an error route that it will go to if you hit some kind of error. So it's automatically giving us an index route. But if we wanted to change how that looks like, we can just define the index template for it. We'll just do an index page. So you can see we go to the index page. If we add a new game and delete it, we go back to the index page. Okay, so that index page is there. We just didn't have content in it before, so it wasn't displaying. Likewise, if we go to a game that doesn't exist, normally there's not an error handler for it, so it's going to throw up an error in the console. But if we created an error template, it's an ugly one, but if we just create this simple error template, now we're being directed to this error template page instead of just getting an error in our console. Okay?
What is all this console stuff? Is that just an Ember plugin?
So this is just the normal Chrome console, and then there's an Ember plugin you can put into there. But even if you don't have the Ember console plugin installed, you're still going to get JavaScript errors down in the normal Chrome console. Okay. I think we just have a little bit of time. Let's just add one more thing. You can see one thing that's annoying is every time you come to add game, it's adding a new dot in there, and it's displaying it before the game is saved. If we wanted to only show games that are saved from our route, instead of just returning this store find game right away, we can filter that result instead. So I'm still going to pull them out, but then I'm going to return a filtered version of that. Yeah, this is going to have game right here. I'm only going to return games that don't have a status as is new. So now, even though I'm at the new game route, that's not being added, and it won't be added until I hit save. So Ember data has several states. There's is new, is valid, is loading, is deleted, and you can look at those states to decide if you want to show that object or do something different with that object, etc. We really don't have much time to finish this all up. There's a lot more that I wanted to cover. If you look at that GitHub repository, I have those additional steps there, and you can look at those git commit diffs to see. I added some has many relationships, so a game has a publisher, but a publisher has many games, and I've shown you how to do that in Ember data. I also added some validation. So right now in our form, you can type in whatever you want into those min and max player. They don't have to be numbers. I showed you how to do some validation inside of those using Ember to make sure that the data is entered in correctly. So I apologize we didn't have enough time to cover everything. Take a look at that GitHub repository to see how to do kind of those extra things. Yeah, let me show that again. Oops, that's not the button. Okay, so there's that GitHub address again. I would take a look at that, and then if you have any questions or comments, or you wanna know more, come talk to me, and I can give you some contact information, and we can talk some more. Thank you.